Hello and welcome to the third video in the Bubble Beginners Program series. In this video, we are going to go over database design. Now, this is an extremely important foundational skill for you to understand and master, as everything in your Bubble application really comes down to your database schema and how well it was designed. When you think about launching your own application and business, the more users you have, the more strain your application ultimately undergoes. So having a proper scalable database design really matters for a successful application. So without further ado, let's go ahead and begin. To look at your database, all you have to do is just navigate to this data tab on the left side. Here we'll see various tabs, right? We have data types, we have privacy, which we'll cover in a later video within this series. We have our app data itself, we have option sets, and our file manager. So let's start with data types first. Before we begin, we just want to note that within Bubble itself, you have two versions of a database. The first version is your test version. This houses all of your test data. And the second version is your live production database. This houses all of the real data that real users are creating, modifying, and updating. So just note that whatever data you have in your test database does not automatically translate to your live database. So for example, if you created a database table called cities, you would want to make sure that for your live database version, you also copied over the city's app data as well. Because when you deploy your application to live, it does not, for good purposes, move your test data over to your live database. So again, just please make that note as you launch your application. So let's go over data types. Bubble itself uses AWS as its database source. What this means is that the Bubble database is actually a relational database. So in order to link your database items together, you actually create relational links. And we'll definitely go over that within this video. Now, data types are what you can consider as tables within your database. So for example, by default, Bubble adds a user data type. So you can think about this user data type as collecting all of the relevant and important information you need to know about your user. So here we can see the default fields are email, the modified date, the created date, and the slug. This is provided to you by default, as every user should have an email when they sign up for your application. Now, we can go ahead and create other fields for our user data type. For example, we can have a field called first name. Field type, we want to let Bubble know or let our database know what's the content format for this field within our database. So for first name, very easily, it should just be text, right? So we'll go ahead and click create. So now we're allowing our database to collect a first name for all of our users. Next, let's create another field. Let's here have something called date of birth. So here we're telling our Bubble database that for every user, or at least some users within our application, we are going to collect a date of birth. Now, we could have it as a text field type, but it doesn't really make sense because this should be a date. So instead, we will go down here and click date. And now we'll go ahead and click create. So now we've built in the field, right, for our user data type to go ahead and collect the date of birth for either all of our users or some of our users. Right, whatever fields you add here are not necessarily a requirement for every single instance of a user. Some of the time, it can be blank for some users, and it can be filled in for other users. It's definitely not a requirement for all users to have a date of birth field filled in with data. Now, with that said, it's also important to only have relevant fields for this specific data type. If we created a new field here and we called it admin date of birth, just for some specific reason, if this user was an admin, we're collecting their date of birth. You can think about when your application really scales, right? And you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands users, and maybe only 5 of them are an admin within your application. It really doesn't make sense for you to collect their date of birth within this user table, because only 5 out of, let's say, 100,000 users are admins, right? So you want to make sure that whatever data you're collecting for a specific data type really makes sense for that data type. If it doesn't, then go ahead and create a new data type and collect that information within that table instead. When you think about retrieving data within your application, let's just say for your user data type, you have 50 fields. Every time you want to search and bring back results for a specific user, you will bring back all 50 fields. So just understand that for proper optimization, you really want to what we call silo out your database. Meaning, when you bring back a user data type, you really only want to bring back the information that you definitely need in a search. Instead, if you only need a specific piece of information a few times within your application, you really don't need it on every single user retrieval. Just create a separate data type, which makes it a lot easier and a lot more optimized for speed. Let's continue building out some fields here. Let's go ahead and create another field. And maybe we can say top 3 hobbies. Now here, what should our field type be? Well, we can probably say that it should be a text type, and it can be others as well. But what's important here is that because this is top 3 hobbies, we really are expecting 3 pieces of data. So what this checkbox allows us to do is collect more than one piece of data for a specific field. So for example, if we click create now, we can see here top 3 hobbies is a list of texts, meaning the first text will be the first hobby, the second text will be the second hobby, and then finally the third text will be the third hobby. So this is a nice way for you to collect more than one piece of data for a specific data field. Now, I just want to caution you here that you definitely do not want to use this if you have many lists. So for example, you certainly do not want to do top 250 hobbies and have it as a list of texts. This is because as you retrieve this, it's going to put a strain on your database to bring back all 250 lists of texts. So really only use lists if it's, let's say, 50 or less. I believe Bubble allows you to go up to 100, but even at 100, it really puts a stress on your database. So please just go ahead and do it. Let's just say at most 50. Even 50, you can argue that that's just too much. So realistically, the best case scenario would be something like 25 or so, maybe even 10 or 15. All right, so please just note, but the good thing is that you can definitely have a list here. Great, so that really covers, the fields here. Now, one thing I want to specify as well is you can have default fields here. So let's say when a user signs up for your application, what you actually are doing are creating a new entry within this user data table, right? You're creating a new user data type entry. So you can actually have defaults. So for example, every time you create a user, maybe by default you want, the birthday to just automatically be January 1st, 1970. Right? So the user is created, just by default we're giving them this birthday. So just understand that defaults allow you to, when you're creating that entry in your database, it'll just give you this default field unless you're actually collecting that information and then saving it to the database. Right, so we have our user data type here. Let's just go ahead and add a second data type. So let's say that we are creating a marketplace, something like eBay. So another data type that we will need is maybe something like product. So for this product data type, this will house all of the relevant information about a specific product in our database. So an example field will say something like product name. So this will be the name of the actual product. Next, we can have something like product description. This will be a further description of the product itself. Next, we'll have something like product price. This will be the price of the product that the seller is selling it for. So in this case, the field type will be a number. Okay, so we don't really need to add more. We can have product image, product images. So, just an example, we can have images here. And in this case, this field as a list is a very good use for this. Right, so let's say for every product, we're allowing the sellers to upload 6 images of that specific product. So this is a good use case for list. Great, so now that we have this table created, basically every time a user or a seller uploads an item for sale in our marketplace, we are going to create a new instance or entry of a product within our database. Now, one thing to note here is, how do we know who is selling this product? Right now we are creating the product, but we don't necessarily have a link to a user. So we can think about having this user data type as a seller as well. But when you think about a marketplace, most likely half of your users are buyers and half of your users are sellers. So does it really make sense for you to capture all of the information you need about a seller within the user data type? Probably not, because as you're performing searches on your users, half of them will have a bunch of empty fields here as a seller. So our recommendation is to actually have a seller data type. So this data type will collect all the information about a specific seller. So let's create some fields. Maybe we have a seller name. So this is the public name for the specific seller. Maybe we have a seller bio. Again, just a bio about that seller. Maybe we have the seller's city. So we can call it location, and we'll make it a geographic address. Right, so we'll just keep collecting information about our seller here. Now, if we go back to product, we want to link this product that was created to the specific seller who owns this product. So we'll create a new field and we'll call it seller. And then in terms of field type, here's the magic of the bubble database. We are going to link the seller table to this field. Right, so we'll click create. And now you can see for product, we have a seller data field, and the content format is actually the seller data type. So basically, for every product, we are going to have a specific seller linked to the product itself. So now, again, we know who the seller is for this product. Lastly, we'll go ahead and create one more data type, and we'll call it a product transaction. So this is basically when a product has been sold. So in this case, let's create some fields. First, we want to know which product was actually sold. So here, the field type will be product, right? We're linking it to a specific product. Now, one thing to note is that perhaps your application allows you to purchase various products. For simplicity's sake, we'll just have one here. If you wanted more, you can make it a list, or you can make a product transaction for every single product that was sold. Again, this is how you start to really think about your database and exactly how you want your design to be. For our example here, we'll keep it simple. We'll have product just being one. Next, we want to know Who was our seller? Who actually sold this product? So we'll have a seller field here. We also want to know who bought this product. So we'll have a buyer field type. We'll have a field type called user. So this is the person that actually bought the product itself. Of course, you can create a buyer data type if you'd like. And then here you would just have it linked to buyer instead of user. It's totally up to you how you want to do that. Maybe for simplicity's sake, we'll have product price. So we'll have a number here. Okay, and we'll add any other relevant information about the product transaction itself. Now, one thing to note, because we linked product, that basically means that we do have the product price here. So within this product transaction, we can actually look inside of this product that we link and find the price. So you don't necessarily have to have product price here. Great. So hopefully now you're starting to understand what data types are, right? These are their tables within your database. And you're starting to understand your data fields, right? These are, let's say, the blueprints that describe that specific data type. For every product, we're collecting images about the product, the description, the name, the price, and the seller. For every product transaction, we are collecting the buyer that purchased that product, the product itself, the product price, and then the seller that sold that product. So definitely take a look at this, play around with it a little bit, try to maybe recreate, let's say, an Airbnb, an eBay, an auctioning website, whatever it might be. Just take some time to create various database schemas. Now let's take a look at app data here. This is where you see your actual test app data itself. Now you can see we are on the test version, right? It says development version here. If we click switch to live database, it'll load and show all of your data for your live production database. So what app data allows you to do is really take a look at the data within your application. We don't have any users or sellers or products or transactions, but we can go ahead and just create test data. So if we click new entry, we can very easily, add a product name, add a description, a price, upload images, add the seller, and click create. And then we'll see that app data get added here. And that's basically how you add data to your application without the use of workflows, right? Being able to just add data through the backend. Now, the last thing in this video that we want to go over is option sets. Option sets are a nice way for you to have default data for your application. It'll make more sense once we go over a couple examples, so let's go ahead and do that. When you think about having a marketplace, let's say a product was sold, right? Someone bought the product from a seller. So we probably want to track the life cycle of that product being listed, being sold, and then ultimately shipped to the end customer. So let's have product status here. So really, when we think about all of the various statuses that can happen for a product, the first one is probably draft. So this means the seller is creating the listing for their product. Maybe they're not quite yet ready to make the listing go live, so it's currently in draft mode. Next, we might have an option called pending approval. What this means is that the seller finished creating their product listing. Now they've submitted it to be approved by the application admin. Right? So this is a way for you to kind of filter out spam within your application. So a seller listed their product, they sent it over to admins to just quickly review that it's not spam. And then the admin would go ahead and push that product live, right? So this basically means that now the product is shown on your marketplace. It's live, it's ready to be purchased. Next, we might have the product as sold. So what this means is that a buyer has purchased that product, it's ready to be shipped. Once the seller has marked that item as shipped, you could say the status of that product is now shipped. And then very finally, the very last status can be delivered. So this means that now the buyer has received the item, and that's really it. That's the end of the status. Of course, there's probably one more status here, which is something like returned slash refunded, something like that you can add as well. So we have this option set here. So let's go back to our data types. And now for this product table, we can create a new field. We can call it product status. And now we'll scroll down and add product status here and click create. So by default, we have all of these options here. Maybe we want draft as our, default. So that's what option sets allow you to do. It's much better than having something like status here with text, right? Because now your application has to set that specific text. It's basically a free form field, and it's not quite good for data searches and retrieves. It's much better to have an option set. So our recommendation is whenever you have a defined set of options for your application data, go ahead and use option sets. It's much cleaner and easy to use. So for example, another one could be something like cities, right? In this case, you don't really want to use freeform text. You can imagine if you're allowing your users to select a city, you don't want to allow them to hand type that in. If your user is, let's say, from Dallas, they might misspell Dallas, right? And now you have some users, having something like Dallas here. Some users have Dallas with many L's. You don't want to allow them to mistype. So it's better to use option sets where you have a defined list and then you just link it to, let's say, seller here, right? We can have something like city. We can link it to cities and click create, right? So now there's a set list of cities that the seller is able to choose from. So that's what option sets are. So definitely take a look at those as well. Almost certainly you'll be incorporating option sets into your application as well. So before we go, we do want to just cover database retrievals. As you're building out your front end, not everything will be static on your page. And what we mean by that is static data. So because we have these various data types, we can actually now present them on our page. So for example, if we have text here, now that we have information about a user, right? If we just type in hello, this is static text. It'll be shown for every single user in your application. It just says hello. But the beauty of Bubble, right, and an application is having dynamic data. So now let's delete this, and you can see this blue insert dynamic data. We'll click that. And here you can actually now retrieve dynamic data. So in this case, we'll have current user, we'll have their first name, and now when your users are logged in, this will be different for every user that's logged into your application, right? It's saying current user's first name. So Bob, when he's logged into the application, it'll say Bob. When Jonathan is logged into the application, it'll say Jonathan, right? So take a look at this and just start playing around with dynamic data. Let's do another example. For example, let's say we want to show a product, right? So here we'll say do a search for, we'll say product, right? So this will show all of our data types that we have in our database. So let's say we want to bring the third product in our database here. So right now we're searching for products. Now, of course, we can add constraints. That's another beauty here, right? So let's just say we want the product name to equal, and we'll have this say basketball. So what this is doing is, okay, we're going to search our database across all products, and we only want to return products that the product name is literally equal to basketball, not contains, right? Not like it, but exactly the word basketball. So we're going to search for all products that have this product name basketball. And here, let's just say we want the item number 3. Okay, and then lastly, we want maybe the product description. So this is a dynamic expression here, right? We were looking in our database and bringing back an item dynamically. Again, to go over this again, we're searching for products. Our one constraint is that the product name is equal to basketball. And now we also want item number 3. So the third item in our database where the product name is basketball, and we're showing the product description. It might be confusing, so you definitely should play around with this. But understand, this is how you start to build dynamic expressions. And really, this one doesn't make much sense. So maybe perhaps instead of product name, you want to add maybe a product price here, right? Well, let's go back to that. Product price, excuse me, is greater than, and maybe we want it greater than $18, right? So we want bring back all products where the price is greater than $18. We want the item number 3, so the third item in that list, and we'll show the product description. Again, we're just building random dynamic expressions here, but this is how you start to retrieve dynamic data for your application. So our recommendation is add a random text element to your front end, click that dynamic data button, and just look through everything you have here. As you can see, there's kind of a lot. For example, we can display the current date and time here for our users. And then when we click more to the right of that, we can now format it in a specific way. So you can see here everything that's possible for the current date or time. Let's clear this expression, and now let's say we want the current user's first name. You see here on the right there's a more button. So now we can actually do more to it. Maybe we want to make the user's first name uppercase. So now this will have all uppercase characters. Maybe you want it to lowercase it. So now we don't care about the case, we just want everything lowercase. We can trim it, right? We can truncate it. We can extract various items from this text. So it'll take us forever to go through all of these. So definitely take a look at all of these dynamic expressions and how you can bring back dynamic data into your application. Over the course of this program, we'll have more examples, right, with workflows, with dynamic retrievals. So you'll start to get a better feel for this. But understand that this is how you start bringing back data from your database into your application. So with that said, this concludes this video on database design, and we hope to see you in the next video, which is all about workflows.